Movement arts are any form of movement that are not competitive. So I define the difference between them and sport. In other words, we do not do movement arts based on challenge and competition in the same way as sports are and have been organized over thousands of years. The movement art is more about self-development. So basically, the way I define the difference is that they focus more on the parasympathetic nervous system, learning more about understanding our own self through movement processes. And so they encompass Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, meditation, and some healing types of movement forms. For example, what is known as medical Qigong. So they're very specific types of exercises to help illnesses and ailments and get ourselves back into a healthy form. I began studying movement arts on the back of studying some Tai Chi and Qigong, which were integral to the Kung Fu that I studied, which was Wing Chun. And I actually started my movement sports, or it was Greco-Roman wrestling, because my father was a champion Greco-Roman wrestler, and he started training me and my brother when I was about 5 or 6. And on the back of that, I got interested in judo and then karate. Now, even though in the West they've become quite sport-oriented, in their original form they are a martial art, and yet the essence of the martial art is internal development again. So that's why the foundation of everything is learning about how energy moves. So this Qigong type of movements, and the Japanese, they call it Kiko. And then the Tai Chi, which is the form of the Qigong in a more ornate, elaborate type of fluid movement set, which in Japanese is called kata. So I studied those forms, then I moved into doing yoga. Yoga in the West is seen predominantly in its hatha form, the physical form, but there are 7 arms, including yoga of the mind, the Raja Yoga, and looking for wisdom. Karma Yoga, which is basically the work we do in terms of offering support to people. It's community work as well. The Bhakti Yoga, devotional yoga, these are the different types of forms of yoga. Yoga just means from the Sanskrit to unite and integrate. So we look at the way in which those forms help us to integrate the different aspects of ourselves until we find some level of harmony and balance. The most important principles the movement arts themselves are based on are the principle of unification. There's a fundamental principle in Taoism. It says from the one came the two, from the two came the three, and from the three came the multitude. So the two meaning the yin and the yang. So the main important principle is understanding anything that is yang is basically upward moving. So it's ascending, expanding, and leads toward manifestation. So anything that is contracting, descending, and leads toward another level of intensification of energy for recreation is yin. So these are tendencies. It isn't necessarily anything to do with masculine, feminine, male, female, but rather these tendencies that I've just mentioned. And so they're the 2 most important principles. Harmonize the yang and the yin as an integral part of understanding the way of the universe, the Tao. On the back of the training that I have received, I have created various movement art systems. The first one I looked at was called Zen Essence Yoga, which looks at integration of the essence of our spirit by firstly calming the mind, slowing it down through meditation, and then opening up the channels in the body where lots of blockages occur, so stretching the meridians, then focusing very much on development of awareness and strength in the core muscles. It's known as the hara in the Japanese, or the dantian of your manipura in this 2nd chakra. So incorporating the strength and the energy development of the 1st and 2nd chakras. That led to movement mastery, which looks at exploring deeper levels of our 5 elements in movement and in nature. And that then led on to other movement forms, which included a dance form, which I can speak about in another context. But then the movement arts forms have expanded the works that I've done now into self-development techniques. So yeah, they were the two main forms which form the foundation based on what I call the evolutionary exercises. We lie on our back, basically going back to the time when we were born, and we reconnect the spine to the earth, understand gravity acts down onto the earth, and we have the reactive force of the earth acting back into our body, receiving this energy and starting to develop the main aspects of what I call three-phase breathing, starting from this center into the heart, from there into the midbrain, connecting these three yin chakras. So they're the two main forms of movement that I've developed that have expanded into other systems. The best way to start practicing these activities is in the lying down pose. It's known as Yoga Nidra, the relaxation pose, and learning to observe what's there. So lying down, observe your body in its natural state. Become aware of any imbalances or distortions. If one leg feels longer than the other, one hip feels higher, or the shoulders. Learning to observe yourself from inside with eyes closed. That means the observation, the stimuli for the observation actually become your senses. So learning to feel first, then see from inside, even hear from inside, and sense where your body is relative to gravity. From there, we do breathing techniques, which are very simple, activation of this area in the lower back. And also, we look and observe to see whether our lower back is in touch with the floor, because a lot of people have an arched back and they have quite an arch between their shoulders and their necks don't touch. So becoming aware of your posture and the alignment of the body and any distortions and imbalances as a result of psychological and physiological pressures and stresses on our body. The benefits of both systems in this instance is looking at reconnecting with our fundamental natural state. And so we go back to looking at how far off the natural state we've veered, and I call it the natural state is the child state, the baby state. Breathing from our dantian, having straight backs. You note that babies, when they sit up, everything seems to be aligned. They open very easily, they're flexible, they're malleable. Everything seems to be what we're trying to achieve. Later on, we spend years stretching and getting ourselves, ironing ourselves back into an original state. So natural state is the original state, and trying to achieve that through being also open in the mind and relaxed. That is very, very important to understand. So the principle of these systems is learning to slow down what we call the monkey mind, the busy distraction that goes on as a result of this central part of the brain, the amygdala. We've got this limbic system that picks up information from our external environment, and that's connected with survival and food and sex and all the rest of it. The middle part of the brain is all about trying to fit into existing references based on existing memory as to what is safe, what is useful, and what can I use so that I can progress. This is fundamentally what goes on in the middle brain. Now, what happens is that that's a very uneasy part of our conscious mind, and that's why there's a lot of filtering going on 24/7, except for when we're sleeping. So what we really want to do is try to find a way to slow all of that down so that we can be present with what information is entering in terms of the different stimuli, and order it according to what is more useful and necessary, so that we're not filtering in a random way without our conscious mind being aware of what is actually useful and what isn't. Accessing the subconscious means accessing information that could be very, very important. We usually get this information in dream states, or if a person has become very well, let's just say, learned in the meditation practices, you can begin to see what actually is going on in terms of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions and your intuition. So this helps us to become a lot more clear, a lot more aligned, and a lot more present in terms of where we are and what's going on in our daily lives. That helps us to manage stress in a much more efficient and effective way. So therefore, rather than just living a repetitive and consecutive life, because what we are so used to, and that in fact is the interesting dichotomy and paradox. On one hand, lots of people say they are looking for self-development and change, but they want it in a very non-changeable way. They want it in the way where things are discernible and predictable and within their comfort zone. And we don't really get to transform that way. So when we are selective and we are very much wanting to be in control of the change, clearly we're not going to get a lot of change happening. And the one thing that's very important to understand is that life and its existence is visible and discernible through movement. And movement is constantly in a state of flux and change. So understanding movement means understanding change, which means understanding life. All my movement systems are based on a fundamental principle which I call choreosynthesis. It translates to space integration. How we integrate the internal space through the external space to the greater space. So that particular principle led to the development of dance mastery. It was initially and focused specifically on dancers because dancers wouldn't understand or didn't understand the principles of movement. Most dancers are trained and they basically do what they're asked to do, especially if you're doing classical dance, without understanding the foundation principles, what I call universal laws and principles of movement at the foundation of the classical dance. So that means starting with center of gravity, law of opposites, leading into geometry and form. Center of gravity is there as an integral part of understanding a center of gravity of an object, but when it starts to move, especially for humans, things change. For example, your center of gravity is just below your navel, and as you go up into the releve position, into the balls of the feet, it goes lower, and that's why we raise our arms and we basically start shifting body positions and movements in order to counterbalance the shift of the center of gravity. Law of opposites relates to if something's moving forward, you need something to move back to balance it. Something moves to the right, you need to do the same to the left. Likewise, as you're going up, you need to be going down internally. So this is what the pliés, tendus, and these are the two main movements in the classical dance, and holding yourself in a state of tension while still being relaxed. The tension means activating energy in the body. This is very significant to understand the principles of movement in the dance mastery. And also, it adds a philosophic base and a spiritual approach to the dance that's never been there in its history in terms of being taught explicitly. It's sometimes present implicitly, and you hope to find the right dance master or ballet master or choreographer that can bring all this out, but it was never taught as an integral part of the training itself. And I also, within dance mastery, taught dancers how to look at injuries, what causes them. Basically, it's bad technique or technique that has not had a focus on understanding the movement of the body, I would say biomechanically and relative to gravity acting down on the body, reactive force of the earth, moving back up into the body, and how to utilize that in space in such a way where we are not simply looking at putting a performance on in the context of a theater, a theatrical entertaining context, but understanding space more like in Tai Chi, that you actually enter into a relationship with the space itself. And that's where your consciousness shifts from coming out through the context of playing a role in a performance that's been set to music, etc., to understanding that you also have a relationship with the dynamic of space and time. And that helps a person to go beyond the limitations of the physical space itself. And that's when you're able to bring in, utilizing the principle of the archetype that you're playing, another dimension. You take the audience on a journey because you yourself go on one. So the principle of choreosynthesis took me into key aerobics. Instead of having aerobics and fitness class, there are slow movements And some of them are actually very powerful, but what we're doing is we're using qi, the life force. Each of these movements generates qi in a different way to the classical forms of either Tai Chi or just focusing on the very soft, gentle movements of the Qigong. Because a lot of breathing is involved as well. It isn't soft, gentle, internal breathing. It's very focused breathing that helps to integrate sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in through the nose, out through the mouth, and sometimes when we're doing quick staccato movement, we also are able to breathe out through the nose, and that helps to slow down and calm the limbic system, which is normally one that's related to beta activity of the brain. So we can do a lot of quick movement and still keep very focused and calm. So Qi aerobics, a series of movements that help us to develop our Qi in a very active, proactive, and I would say targeted and focused manner. And so it's been developed for people who don't necessarily want to learn form. That means classical forms from other systems that are basically from the East. So I developed it so you can do it like a aerobics class, but its focus is to develop an understanding of harmony, balance, rhythm, timing, and using energy, and also entering again into the relationship of space. And then there's quantum power training, which basically puts you into a Zen state. So it's basically being in the zone so that you're not in a state of tension, stress, or fighting yourself. When the body is relaxed and not in conflict with itself, you actually can last much longer because you're in a relaxed state. Even when you're picking up heavy weights or doing a stepping machine, running on a stepping machine or on a cycle, the state of mind that you're in is what is most important. And that is what the quantum power training is based on. Altered state of consciousness, focusing on observing thoughts, feelings, sensations, any tension and stress, you're very, very calm. You're sending your mind back to the body to keep very calm. And at the end of each set, bring your breathing back down to zero, rather than pushing the self, as I've seen obviously with a lot of people. They think that this is a good thing to do, but they're exhausting themselves. Where's the difference? Instead of kicking the adrenaline up to a peak and then just getting an adrenaline high and pump, you're keeping everything at an even pace where you're actually developing a far better level of strength, in internal endurance, harmony and balance, and actually the training is a therapeutic process. And that is the difference with quantum power training. Instead of developing strength, you develop power. And power is an internal capacity to sustain, to establish and sustain endurance and longevity in your training techniques and in your daily life, and basically the rest of your life.